We would like to greet you again. Good morning to those who have joined our webinar this morning. A warm and hearty welcome from the NACCW. My name is Elwin Gallen, the past chairperson of the NACCW, and I'm standing in this morning on behalf of the chairperson, Fiona, that can't be with us due to other commitments. We also would like to tender the apology of our treasurer, Francisco Cornelius, and our director, Donald Ngonyama, who are at council commitments this morning. We extend in our warm and hearty welcome to the members of the National Executive Committee of the NACCW, all our child and youth care workers, social service professionals who have joined us, and then our Deputy Director, Zeni Tambadu, who's here with us this morning. We also would like to welcome our special guest, Professor Jenny McGrath, who hails all the way from Canada. She said it's 6 a.m. in the morning there. I will introduce her shortly before she commences with her presentation. And so we are glad that we are all here together. As you know, the NACCW uses this webinars as part of our development of child and youth care workers in the profession. And it's always good to keep us abreast of developments in our field. And we're glad that we can have our specialists and expertise from abroad to also share with us. Before we then commence, we would like to ask that we all observe a moment of silence. We all, mostly most of us, have noted the passing of our child and youth care worker, Sis Pat McClina, there from the Northern Cape. And we, on behalf of the National Association of Child and Youth Care Workers, want to express our sincere condolences to the bereaved family and all child and youth care workers, especially those in the Northern Cape who have also worked for many years with her. We also acknowledge, if we didn't have any names, other child and youth care workers who have passed on the past year. Let us have a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Thank you. Before we proceed with our webinar this morning, we have to remind certain people that there are also rules of conduct as we have our webinar, and we always have to just share with you like they do on the aeroplane. They always remind us of the safety precautions before we fly in or out. And so it is also same here with the webinar. We ask please politely that you keep your microphones muted during the presentation. Switch your cameras off, as it also influences the transmission. And you're welcome to make your comments there in the chat box. Please share with us who's in attendance. Your questions and comments can be there. But after the presentation, we will allow a few minutes. Actually, we will allow time for discussion, for your comments or your questions, as we would like to engage and interact with each other this morning. So please let us observe and have our cooperation in this regard. So there are those ways to raise your hand or to react, all the features that we have here on the platform as you participate with us. So once again, welcome again, and it gives me then a pleasure this morning to introduce our special guest to you. I just need to get my notes quickly. We've got with us this morning Professor Jenny McGrath. She's a child and youth care practitioner in child and youth care at the child and youth care department at MacEwan University in Alberta, Canada. A few things about Professor Jenny McGrath is that her work is grounded in deep commitment to the field, with particular interest in education, professional identity, family support, creative arts-based interventions, relational practice, and the history of child and youth care work. Jenny brings with her this morning the curiosity, energy to both the teachings and practice, and she values curating learning. Sorry, my document's getting smaller here. Meaningful connections in learning process outside her professional work. Jenny told us she enjoys live music, traveling, and spending time in nature. We are privileged this morning to have Professor Jenny McGrath with us, and she will share with us this morning the theme that I don't have it now with me here. Let me just quickly see. Giving voice to practice, noticing context, and child and youth care identity. A mouthful to share. Professor Jenny, welcome. And we are all going to listen attentively and afterwards have some time to engage with you. We hand over then to you to do your presentation. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Elvin, for that welcome. I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me a second to pull up the file here. And is that visible to everybody?
Yes, it's on.
It is.
Yes,
it is.
thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to jump ahead here. And although Elwin mentioned that I'm connected to MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is one of the provinces furthest west, that is not where I am today. So welcome, and thank you very much for being here. I'm joining you from St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada, the most easterly province, where the day is just beginning. This photo was taken from Signal Hill, a place where people often gather to see the first sunrise in Canada. As you are joining from across South Africa and in connection with other parts of the world, we are coming together from different places, experiences, and context, grounded in shared commitments in child and youth care. I also want to acknowledge that I'm joining from the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples and to recognize that connections to place and to ways of understanding the world long precede all of us. My hope today is that this time together feels reflective, grounded in practice, and connected to your own experiences. To get us started, I'd like to invite you to think of a moment in your practice, a recent moment. It doesn't need to be anything profound, just a moment that stands out to you. So as you can see on the slide, I have some guiding questions. What did you notice in that moment? How did you or how might you put words to what you were noticing? Take a minute to jot down whatever comes to mind. You don't need to put this in the chat. It's more for your own benefit to start to think about what are you noticing in your practice and what words might you use to make sense of that. So no need to overthink it, just your initial thoughts. And I'm going to pause just for a few seconds and let you sit with that for a minute. And if you are comfortable, you can share a word or a short phrase in the chat about what you noticed. What was the focus of your noticing? You don't need to, but you certainly are welcome to. And if one or two of you are comfortable sharing, we can have somebody turn on their camera, turn off their microphone just for a minute and share one of your noticings with the group. And again, no pressure to do that, but if somebody would like to share, you're welcome to. So noticing is something we all do all the time in our practice, and it's what's happening around us. So it's an important element of child and youth care practice. So let's take a closer look at noticing. In the child and youth care practice, noticing is more than just observing what's happening. It's about attuning to the moment, being present with what's happening around us and within us. Because noticing isn't just about outward noticings. We also have to notice what's happening for us. It includes being aware of ourselves, of others, and of the relationships in the spaces that we are in. And it happens in the life space in real time, in the environments where young people are living, learning, and experiencing things as they unfold. So noticing is not just what's happening. We're also noticing about how we are experiencing it and how others might be experiencing it. Because as we all know, we can experience the same situation, but our interpretations of what that is and what we notice in any given situation can be different. But I believe noticing is the foundation of relational practice. So one of the core challenges in our work is this. We're often very strong at noticing what's happening and responding in the moment. We do that all the time, every day in our practice. That's the core part of child and youth care. But we're often less confident when it comes to articulating our practice, putting into words what we're noticing, thinking and doing, and why. As a result, our work can become invisible or sometimes oversimplified. It can look like we're just being present or just building relationships. And that's one of my least favorite words in the English language is just. It minimizes, often without intention, when in reality, there's a lot more going on. So there's a gap, not between doing the work and caring about it, but between doing the work and being able to clearly explain it. Most of us were taught how to notice, but not always how to put that noticing into words. So that's some of what we're going to talk about today. Sometimes our work just gets described as intuitive or natural, and there's some truth to that. With experience, many of our responses do feel intuitive. But when we describe our work in that way, it can unintentionally minimize the skill involved, and it can make complex, intentional practice look simple or even invisible to others. And one of my good friends and colleagues, who I think a lot of you know, Jack Phelan, often talks about complexity behind simplicity. And when Jack used to speak to our students, they had a really hard time understanding why the simple sometimes minimize the complexity, but we can't shy away from trying to make that complexity visible to ourselves and to others. I'm just noticing there is a comment in the chat. Thank you. In my previous child and youth care practice experience, I observed that many young people are affected by trauma, including GBV, and often express their struggles through behavior rather than words. That also course teenage pregnancy and dropout. Yes, thank you very much. That's a very important aspect of noticing, especially linking to what's potentially going on behind the behaviors that we're seeing. So to someone from the outside of our work, it can appear very straightforward, right? That we're just responding in the moment. And again, I'm using just intentionally here. But we know there is much more happening beneath the surface. And the example in the chat really starts to speak to some of that. And when we don't have language to name that complexity, it becomes harder to explain and harder for others to fully understand the depth of our work. And as we know, there are many times that we as child and youth care practitioners can feel like our work is misunderstood or undervalued, sometimes by our funders, by our supervisors if they're not in child and youth care practice themselves, sometimes by children, youth, and families. So it's important that we're able to be clear and articulate in how we describe that. So language can help with this, and it gives us a shared understanding. We do have some really common language that child and youth care practitioners around the world would have in common, but it can also limit if we rely too heavily on jargon and acronyms that don't translate beyond our field. We all know that acronyms and even terms such as life space, which make a lot of sense to us as practitioners, may not mean what we want other people's interpretation of that word to mean. So we need to be able to describe it. So it's not just about having language, it's about using it in ways that clearly communicate what we're doing and why. One of the ways we begin to name and understand our practice is through shared perspectives in child and youth care. So the terms on the slide, like relational, strengths-based, attention to context, grounded in the life space, and focused on holistic development, are pretty common frames of reference for us as practitioners. And these aren't things that we add to our practice. They're ways of understanding what we're already doing. And I think that's an important element to starting to articulate our work. They shape what we notice and how we notice what is happening and how we make meaning of it and how we act in response. And while these perspectives are central in child and youth care, many of them are also shared across other helping professions. So we often describe child and youth care as relational practice, and it is, but Lots of other professions would also say they work in relational practice. So we need to be very articulate in what we mean when we talk about relational practice from a child and youth care perspective or lens. Having language is one thing, but being able to use it clearly to explain our practice is something else. And we're not just articulating our practice for ourselves. As I said before, we're doing it for colleagues, for supervisors, other professionals, funders, systems sometimes, and importantly, with children, youth, and families. It's a big part of advocacy work. And as we all know, advocacy is critical to child and youth care. And if we're understood in the how and the why, advocacy can become more challenging. So we need language that helps us explain our practice in ways that are clear, meaningful, and accessible across different contexts. Alongside perspectives, there are also many theoretical perspectives that inform our practice. We don't walk into practice empty. We're always drawing on different ways of understanding what's happening, even when we don't always name them. We still carry them with us. This word map represents just some of the theories that often show up in child and youth care practice. So things like strengths-based, attachment theory, ecological systems theory, developmental theories, social constructionism, trauma-informed care. They're all areas that we can draw on when we're trying to make sense of our work. And many of these come from other disciplines like psychology, sociology, education, but they still shape how we understand young people, relationships, and the context we're working in. These theories help us to make sense of what we're noticing. But again, the challenge isn't just that we're using them, it's whether we can clearly name them and explain how they're informing our practice. So both perspectives and theories give us language, but we still need ways to bring that language together and make it visible in our practice. So this brings me to a core message. If we cannot name our practice, we cannot share it, we cannot evaluate it, and we cannot strengthen it. Without language, even strong, thoughtful practice can remain unseen and difficult to build on. And this is where voice becomes essential. It's not an add-on, it's a core part of our practice. So why does voice matter in practice? In child and youth care, we're often focused on the doing of the work. And I think we're all very good at getting in, putting our heads down, and moving through the day in creative, innovative ways. We're present and we're responding. We're supporting children, youth, families, each other. And we're not always taking the time to name what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it's not intentional. That's just the nature of our work. But voice matters. It shapes how practice is understood. It makes our practice visible. It strengthens our professional identity and helps us work more effectively with others across teams, across roles, and across contexts. It shows up in how we document our work, how we communicate with colleagues, and how we advocate. And ultimately, in the outcomes for children, youth, and families, voice is critical. So voice is not just about communicating, it's about clarity, intention, and impact. If we don't name our practice, others may define it for us. I'm just going to take a quick pause with a check-in, and I'm okay if people have questions as we're going. If you want to pause at any given time, I know there's a dedicated space at the end for that as well, but feel free to chime in if something isn't making sense or you want clarity in the moment. I'm absolutely okay to switch gears as needed. So one way to think about this is a process. In our practice, we're constantly moving between noticing, meaning making, putting words to what's happening, taking action, and then reflecting. I'm sure that makes sense. That's not anything that is new information for anybody who's here today. We notice something, we make meaning of it, we put it into words, we act, and then we reflect. And that reflection shapes what we notice next. It isn't linear, it's something we move through fluidly, often all at once. But I think the piece that often gets missed is articulation. That moment of putting to words what we're noticing and thinking. That's where voice lives. It's the bridge between what's happening internally, our noticing and our meaning making, and what we do in practice. Without that step, a lot of our thinking stays internal and becomes harder to share, to explain, or to build on. Does that make sense to people? That I know I've had many examples where I've noticed something. I'm not sure if I should share it. Am I the person who should be saying that? All the questions that are in my head, sometimes 20 questions, what feels like in the span of 2 seconds. But I choose to stay silent for whatever reason. And I think we all have experience with that. But without the step of gap, closing the gap between our internal, it becomes harder to share, explain, and build on our practice and what we're doing. And I think it also adds to why programs become stagnant. And that's all programs. I teach in a university, and our program has had moments over the 20 years that I've been there that we've felt stagnant, and we've had to be intentional about trying to move past that. So we're already doing all of this. The difference is whether we're naming it. So in the comments, Zenny, when we don't articulate clearly, we often feel others don't understand us and what we are doing, and then we get frustrated with them. Absolutely. And I think we sometimes forget that we're not good at articulating. And not that I want us to be frustrated with ourselves. I think there is some elements of frustration that come with ourselves, but awareness of they're not understanding because we're not being clear is an important piece of this practice pathway. So if this is the process, the question becomes what helps or hinder us in moving through it, especially when it comes to voice. So I think one of the most important elements of safety is mattering. And one of the conditions that shapes our ability to give voice to practice is mattering. Mattering is a sense that what we notice, think, and understand actually has value, and that we have value. When practitioners feel their observations and insights are valued, it creates space for reflection, for confidence, and for expression. Without that sense of mattering, it can be much harder to speak up. We might second guess our thinking or keep our insights to ourselves. In child and youth care, we often talk about the importance of mattering for children and youth. That sense of being seen, valued, and important in someone's world. There's a well-known idea, you probably all know it from Bronfenbrenner, that every child needs at least one adult who is deeply committed to them. Paraphrasing, of course, there. But mattering isn't just important for young people, it's also essential for us as practitioners. And I do think we don't focus on that enough. I think mattering is critical for us as practitioners. Our work is complex, our work is layered, it's nuanced, and it also can be trauma-inducing for us as practitioners. We all know the turnover rates, burnout, those types of things are high in our field. And I think mattering also links to the reasons why that is the case and why it is often high. But mattering shapes whether we feel confident and supported enough to give voice to our practice. And it also is not just about giving voice to our practice, it's about giving voice to what we're thinking and what we're feeling and what we're noticing. And sometimes being able to work in a space where you feel safe enough to say, I was scared, or I'm afraid I made a mistake. And I think I may have hurt something or hurt someone unintentionally by the words I used. It's hard to speak up when you're afraid of being scolded, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of looking like the negative words in your head that I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, those types of things. When practitioners experience mattering, they're more likely to reflect, to articulate, and to share their thinking. Mattering is one piece, but it doesn't exist on its own. The context where we're working also shape whether and how voices support it. And I think this next slide is going to link nicely to the next comment in the chat about institutional systems and structures combined with limited understanding of childcare among other professionals contribute to the marginalization of child and youth care practice by restricting platforms for the expression of their professional voices. Absolutely. And that's why I think things like webinars and conferences are really important for moments of connection for us across child and youth care contexts, because sometimes we can feel very isolated in our own experience and our own systems and the dynamics that are happening. And there's solidarity and innovation that comes from when we share with each other. So I think another condition that shapes our ability to give voice to practice is context. And our practice doesn't happen in isolation. It's always, always shaped by context. That includes cultural, organizational, and relational context, as well as the immediate moment that we're in. And being in the moment is a term we use a lot in child and youth care. I'm not sure we always enact it as intentionally or as thoughtfully as we think we do. Context influences what we notice and how we interpret what's happening. And if we don't name context when we're articulating our practices, our explanations can be incomplete or even misaligned. They may lack understanding, and they may, without context, it can be hard for others to really grasp what is happening. And I think that's especially important for contexts like South Africa and Canada, where history, culture, and systemic factors deeply shape young people's experiences. But it's true across all settings and all contexts. A young person's response might be shaped by their personal history, by what's happening in that moment, by cultural meaning, by family dynamics, or by broader system influences. And I think that's true also of how we interpret. And all of this is happening in the life space in real time. So our work takes place in the flow of everyday moments, not just in planned sessions. And just is very intentional there. Planned sessions are rare in the day-to-day life space, especially in 24/7 environments where we work with children and youth. So part of our role is not only noticing what's happening around us, but also situating ourselves within that context. How are we making sense of things? What are we thinking? What are we feeling? What are we noticing about ourselves? And when we can name context clearly, our practice becomes more accurate, more intentional, and easier to understand. So context shapes what we notice and how we understand it, and professional identity shapes how we come to that understanding and how we express it. So a third condition that shapes our ability to give voice to practice is professional identity. And it's that sense of who we are as child and youth care practitioners. When we have a clear sense of that identity, it gives us both the language and the confidence to name our work. Without that clarity, our practice can feel intuitive, but difficult to explain. One of the things that stands out, especially in places like South Africa, is the strength of passion and commitment to child and youth care practice. And I speak confidently on that because I was in South Africa in 2019 for the World Conference and was in awe of all the energy, passion, commitment that I saw in every child and youth care context and space that I was in. And I was fortunate enough to travel to an Isabindi Safe Park and to witness some family workers doing their thing. Obviously, the conference, the songs in the morning of the conference, I had 3 students with me and said, I fear I've ruined you forever for conferences because child and youth care in South Africa was their first introduction to a conference. So a little aside there, but I do think that passion and commitment to child and youth care is part of our professional identity. At the same time, our identity connects us across different regions and contexts. Even though our settings may look different, that could be practice settings. It could be geographical settings. Because even within South Africa, the different types of work you're doing and the different locations will have different understandings, different interpretations, sometimes different rules. In Canada, for example, we have federal legislation, but we also have provincial legislation. And that provincial legislation, for example, for the Child, Youth, and Family Enhancement Act in Alberta, looks different than the same act in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, where I am today. So understanding systems is critical, but can be confusing if we're not sure who we are as practitioners, because the rules may say I can show up this way in one context and not in another. So it's important to keep our identity because that keeps us grounded. Child and youth care has developed over time, drawing on theory, practice, and research, and often adapting ideas from other disciplines in ways that fit the lives and contexts of child and youth care. What connects us is not just the tools we use, but how we use them through a child and youth care lens. And I think that's the critical piece. Professional identity supports both the competence and the confidence to give voice in practice. And I think they're 2 separate things. You can be competent and not have confidence, and you can have confidence but not be competent. But ideally, we would have both. So when we bring together mattering, context, and professional identity, we begin to create conditions that support voice in practice. And I think that's a critical element for supervisors and managers and educators to be conscious of the need to consider mattering, context, and professional identity in their work. Sorry. I'm just going to disclose because this may the dryness might become more profound. I have long COVID, and when I speak for long periods of time, my voice gets very dry. So that's why you'll note me sipping water. But in case my voice starts to not become as clear, please let me know so I can moderate as needed. So, voice as connector. Repeat the point about confidence again. Sure. So I think confidence and competence often become, they get treated like synonyms, and they're not, in fact, the same thing. You can have confidence in what you're doing, but not really be competent in your capacity, your skill development, etc. And the opposite is also true. You can have all kinds of skill and knowledge and experience, but may lack the confidence to bring voice to your practice, or to even move beyond your internal thinking to doing in practice. So I think it's an important distinction, and ideally we would be competent and confident in our work. And I think that's a goal we should also always be working toward together as direct practitioners, but also as supervisors, educators, researchers, in trying to help people create threads between confidence and competence, and recognizing that that can change when situations or circumstances within a context changes. So even within the same job, a change of leadership can shift the confidence and sometimes the competence, because expectations may shift with direct practitioners. So it's an important element. Is that clear as any? Okay, perfect. So when we bring all this together, mattering, context, and professional identity, this is where voice becomes a connector in practice. Voice links to what we notice, what we think, and what we do. It helps us to ask, what am I noticing? So far, we've been talking about voice as something that connects our thinking to our actions. But voice also shows up in how we explain our practice to others. It's the difference between knowing what we're doing and being able to clearly say, what did I notice? What do I think is happening? What am I doing and why? Why am I doing it? So voice isn't just about what we say in practice, it's how we explain our practice. I want to share a brief example of what this looked like for me early in my child and youth care journey. So when I was a child and youth care student, I was working a shift in a dialysis unit in a children's hospital when a medical crisis happened. In that moment, I stayed calm, moved to the young person, and kept engaging with her. I was focused on helping her stay regulated and not feel alone while everything else was happening around her. There was a lot of noise, a lot of movement, a lot of energy. Later, in supervision with someone who hadn't been there, I was told that it looked like I didn't fully grasp how serious the situation was. And that really caught me off guard, because in my mind, I was being very intentional in my interaction with the young person. But when I had tried to explain my thinking, I realized I didn't yet have the language to do that clearly. I was drawing on ideas about presence, meeting the young person where they were, supporting them in the moment, but I couldn't name that in a way that made my practice visible to someone else. I managed to get through the conversation, but it was the first time I really understood that if I can't clearly name what I'm seeing, thinking, and doing, my practice may be understood. And that matters, because how our practice is understood shapes how we're evaluated. And as a student, obviously, supervision was linked to evaluation and how we begin to see ourselves as practitioners. So thankfully, in that moment, I had a supervisor who I was able to talk through that with in a safe way. And I had confidence that what I did in the dialysis unit was thoughtful and intentional. So I was able to muddle through without having really clear language linked to things like theory. I would describe it differently to a supervisor now than I did then. So I want to take you back to the moment you thought about earlier. If you had to explain that moment to your supervisor, so the one that I asked you to write down a noticing, if you had to explain that moment to a supervisor, what would you say? What would you include, and how, and what might be harder to put into words? So, going to give you a moment here to think about that, and then and write that down, right? What would you say? What would you include? And what might be harder to put into words about what you noticed? And don't worry about trying to get it perfect. Just try to be as clear as you can in your own thinking around it. And again, I'll invite, if you want to drop some words into the chat about what felt difficult to put into words. What made the articulation piece hard to be clear or specific? And I just want to acknowledge the last comment in the chat. Even within the same job, a change in leadership can affect both confidence and competence. Absolutely. I've had several situations throughout my career where that's been a factor for me. So let's, when you're ready, let's have a few people just write a word or a short phrase in the chat about what felt difficult to put into words.
Anybody would like to share? Give some feedback, someone from the field.
So there's one comment here. I believe the key point lies in how we explain it. It's essential to understand the language and maintain accurate logging. Yes, that articulation piece, especially in writing, is really important. What makes it hard to articulate the nuance, I guess, of our work? Because I haven't worked in group care in a long time, but I remember reading logs about it was a good day. Everybody did dot 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 dot, but there's no essence of child and youth care practice identified at all in the log. And sometimes the most meaningful shifts are working through conflict. To me, that could be phrased as a good shift more so than nothing happened. If nothing is happening worth logging, are we really being intentionally engaging in a relational way with children, youth, and their families? So Harold says, I was not able to change a decision made about a young person because I could not say why I disagree with this. I was new in the field. Oh, thank you. That's an excellent example. And I think the new in the field is important, but I don't want to minimize that challenge can happen. I've been doing this work for over 30 years, and I still have moments where it's hard to articulate. Help someone who doesn't understand. Good morning. Yes. So I'm seeing things that don't understand, hard to explain, not sure what to say. You know, there's a lot happening sometimes. So even being able, yes, Zenny, I love that comment. Rushing ahead with a plan, not processing and articulating it enough to myself. I think that, especially when our work is so fast paced, we sometimes have to get ahead of ourselves and can't sit in the plan of it all. So this is exactly the gap we've been talking about. The work is happening, the thinking is there, but putting it into words can be challenging. And it's important to say there isn't one right way to interpret the moment. Like I said earlier, 5 of us could be working with the same young person on the same shift and experience an interaction differently. That's why talking to each other as practitioners and being able to clearly articulate what we're noticing, thinking, feeling is important. Different perspectives are valid when they're grounded in what we noticed and the context we're working in. So the question becomes, how do we strengthen our ability to do this? What you may have noticed in that exercise is it may have been easier to describe what happened, but harder to explain your thinking. You may have realized that you were doing more in the moment than you could easily put into words. Describing the moment is one thing, but explaining your thinking, your intention, and your rationale is something else. And like Zenny's comment, sometimes we haven't even done that for ourselves. So if we can't do it for ourselves, how do we then translate that to sharing it with someone else? And that's the space we're working in. So how do we begin to make that thinking more visible? So one framework, this should be familiar to most of you, I think. One framework that can help us begin to make our thinking more visible is the BID model. So at its core, the BID model reminds us that in every moment of practice, we are bringing who we are, how we understand what's happening, and how we respond. So being would be the who we are, interpreting, understanding what's happening, and how we respond is the doing. If you think back to the moment you just reflected on, BID helps us to begin to unpack what was happening beneath the surface. It helps us consider what we're bringing in the moment, how we're interpreting it, and how that shaped our response. And this is where voice becomes important, because the model itself is not enough. We need to be able to put words to each of those parts. And there's many, many characteristics to the BID model. And it's not always easy for us even to understand the nuance in all of those, like a concept like love, which I know Zenny has written a lot about in her work, is not easy to define or understand. And but it's the core characteristic of everything we do in child and youth care practice. BID gives us a way to organize our thinking, but voice is what makes that thinking visible to others and to ourselves. Another way to think about this is through a more relational and dynamic lens. So I don't know if you're familiar with the relational weaving textbook that came out a couple of years ago that John Digney from Ireland edited. But he based it in research and used the analogy of a loom to put a framework to our practice. And it's the idea of relational weaving. This reminds us that practice is not one single thing. It's multiple threads coming together in each moment. There's a structure that holds the work, different threads like relations. So the structure would be the loom, and it's love, optimism, other focus, and mattering, for example. Different threads like relationships, context, knowledge, and values that we draw on in the moment, and the practitioner brings it all together. So the loom, the warp, the weft, the shuttle, and the weaver. What we do is shaped by how all of these come together in a particular time, in a particular place, with a particular young person or their family. And it's never finished. Our practice is always evolving, shaped by experience, reflection, and new learning. But again, this complexity can be hard to see from the outside. And that's where voice again becomes essential. Voice is what helps us name the threads and explain how they're coming together in our practice. Even experienced practitioners are continually adjusting and strengthening their weaving. So whether we think about practice as a process, a model, or a weaving, the question remains, how do we make all that visible? So when we bring these ideas together, what we start to see is that it's already happening in your practice. You are already noticing, meaning making, drawing on knowledge and relationships, and responding in the moment. Whether we think about it as a pathway like the bid model or relational weaving, these are all different ways of describing what you're already doing. What brings all of this together and what makes it visible is voice. Voice is how we name what we are noticing, how we explain our thinking, and how we make our practice understandable to others. It's not about adding something new. It's about making visible what's already there. And when we can do that, and when we can clearly articulate our practice, it strengthens how we work, how we collaborate, and the impact that we have. So why do frameworks matter in all of this? Frameworks aren't there to tell us what to do. They're there to help us name and explain what we're already doing in practice. If you think back to the moment you've reflected on, frameworks give you a way to organize and express your thinking more clearly. And then going back even further to articulating theory and concepts such as relational practice, life space to others. They help us name what we're doing. They help us provide a shared language. And I think we do have a shared language in child and youth care that we can make more visible ourselves and take pride in that shared language. That's why I really like the bid model and the relational weaving, because it helps us, even though the concepts aren't unique to child and youth care, the framing of it is unique to child and youth care. And the understanding, the daily life events, being the center and the core of our work is a unique aspect of those models. And they support clearer articulation of our thinking and our actions. And over time, that strengthens our professional identity because we can more confidently explain our role and our impact. For example, the bid model can support clearer thinking. Right? When I'm working with a young person playing Monopoly, that may look just like I'm playing a game, but in fact, I'm working on turn taking and I'm working on budgeting, getting them to use the money and how to navigate those elements in a pretty routine game. I used to talk about a lot in other trainings I did around, it's not just an ice cream. Taking a young person out for an ice cream is so layered and so nuanced if it's done with intention. Sometimes it's just going for an ice cream, and that's okay too. But when the people who were funding our program, they said I was rewarding problematic behavior, and they didn't use problematic as the word, by buying an ice cream for a child. If I wasn't able to clearly state why I was buying that ice cream, that could have impacted something as serious as funding if they thought that we were not being useful or intentional about the funding sources provided. Relational weaving can help us think about connection and complexity and our role in that, because I love in that analogy the weaver, right? Because even the most sophisticated weavers have to take care of their loom. And they may introduce new techniques, new threads into how they work with and use that loom. Otherwise, they're likely going to continue making the exact same type of quilt, and that may be fine in some contexts. But in child and youth care, if we become stagnant, we are likely going to be working from an unethical place. New knowledge brings new learning and information. Those of us who've been doing this work a really long time can think back to things that we did in our first days that we wouldn't do today because we have new knowledge, new information, etc. Yes, we want beautiful quilts. Yes, that's a lovely analogy. But neither of those matter if we can't put words to what's happening. Voice is what makes it all visible, and it's what makes the quilts beautiful, right? It makes them really visible and articulate to others. There are many other frameworks that we can support as well. So I'm sure you work under other frameworks that may not be solely based in child and youth care. I know the Circle of Courage, for example, is one that can be drawn on to help define, understand, frame practice. And what matters is how we use them to make meaning and articulate our practice. And when we can do this well, we can clearly name and explain our practice to other people. It strengthens not just how we talk about our work, but how we carry it out. So what does this actually change in our practice? When we can clearly name what we're seeing, thinking, and doing, it strengthens our ability across all areas of the work. It strengthens how we assess what's happening. And I think noticing is really a critical part of assessment. We have formal assessments that we need to complete depending on the context that we're in. But sometimes we can get so stuck on a goal plan or filling out a required form or chart that we miss the nuance of what's happening and the noticing. So both are important. I'm not minimizing that formal assessment is sometimes needed and necessary, but that's not always the essence of the child and youth care practice and the noticing. It's seeing the in-between, and as Garfet likes to talk about, the space in between us, right? To do thorough assessment, we need to get into that space in between. How we intervene with intention. So that links to, like, I'm a very strong advocate for the use of activity and creative and arts-based intervention in our work. I think talking is not always the best way to engage with anybody. I think when you share moments of joy together, when you're laughing with a child that they have tears rolling down their face, the nuance that you were in the in-between in those moments. And I think that's how we intervene with intention, right? And not being afraid to move into the silence, or not being afraid when behaviors are problematic, to really get creative about how do we shift this experience for ourselves and for the young person. And then how do we evaluate what's changed? because again, I think we do a lot of noticing and doing, but we don't always reflect in and on the moment of what is happening, how are we navigating this. And then I think this is another piece that we need to continue. How do we contribute to shared knowledge and research in the field? And not everyone's going to be doing complex research and writing in journals and articles, but we need more practitioner voice in those spaces as well. So I encourage people to engage where you're comfortable and sometimes step into that discomfort for sharing what you know, because practitioners who are doing the work day in and day out are the people who I love to listen to and learn from, because they help me make sure I'm educating from a place that's informed and nuanced with the complexities of the places my students are doing their practicums, for example. And because all of these require us not just to act, but to explain our thinking, voice strengthens not only how we talk about our practice, but how effectively we carry it out. Without articulation, these parts of practice become harder to demonstrate and harder to develop. And that's where the stagnant approaches can really take hold. We've always done that is a common term you hear, or yeah, we've tried that, or minimizing that growth and change can get in our way. So if this is what makes voice possible, the question becomes, how do we continue to strengthen it in our practice? So what does giving voice to practice actually look like? It starts with noticing with intention. So taking a minute, sometimes in crisis, you don't have a lot of time, but even in the most critical situations, being able to assess in the moment what you're noticing inside, outside, what's informing your thinking. You can do a lot of that in a very quick amount of time. Making meaning explicit. So first doing that for ourselves. If we can't, to Zenny's earlier point, sometimes because we're so busy, we just do, and we haven't even really made sense of it for ourselves. So we need to start first by making meaning explicit for ourselves. And I use those two models, the bid model and relational weaving, in everything I do, because it helps me stay grounded in my CYC practice. Because even though I'm not doing direct practice with children, youth, and families right now, I am doing direct practice with child and youth care students. And for me, as an educator, I want to make sure I'm staying current and relevant to practice, because I want them to leave with a strong sense of competence and identity. It helps us put your thinking into words and naming the why behind your actions. And this is something we develop over time. So to the comment, it's often early in your practice, it can be tough to articulate what you're doing, and tough to have the confidence to do that. So we do need to practice it, and that's why thoughtful supervision is important as well. And we need to be intentional about the practicing, and to be open to feedback loops from young people. I think the most learning on what worked or didn't work came from children, youth, and families I've worked with, and from my colleagues who I may not have agreed with in the moment, or saw something differently than my colleagues saw it. So being open to those feedback loops. Even small shifts like pausing to name your thinking, or trying out language in supervision or with colleagues, can make a difference. It's about making what you already do more visible, more intentional, and easier to share. So at the beginning, you were asked to notice a moment in your practice. Then you were asked to begin putting some words to that. Now I'm inviting you to consider what has shifted. What still might feel out of reach? What has become clearer? What still feels difficult to put into words? And what is one way you can begin to strengthen your voice in practice? So just take a minute to reflect on those 3 questions that are on the slide. And again, if you'd like to share a word or a phrase in the chat, or if you want to turn off your or turn on your camera and turn on your microphone, feel free to do that as well. Something that's become clearer, or something that's piqued your curiosity, or an intention that you might like to bring forward into your day-to-day practice. So what's a takeaway of that you're considering so far? So today we've been exploring something many of us already do, but don't always name. Thanks, Lizzie. My thoughts need to be clearly reflected in my voice, and this needs to be clearly connected. And Linda says, to articulate more clearly to each other as CYCs and to assist one another. I think that's where the most significant learning can come in, is by really testing out how would you articulate. It's hard in an interdisciplinary meeting with a lot of other professionals who may or may not create space for your voice to be clearly seen or heard, for that to be where you test out how to articulate in ways that other people could clearly understand. Or even I often tell my students, like, practice on your parent or on a sibling or on your spouse. How do you articulate what child and youth care is? How do you describe it? Because often they want to say what we do by what we aren't doing. Well, we aren't this, or we aren't this discipline, or we don't do this. But that's not saying what we do, which again is another example of why things can be hard, right, for us to explain. So naming the why, at times we have the information and need to explain those we service why. Yes, so children, youth, families would be part of that potentially, but also to funders, to government, etc. At times we are too accustomed to things and assume others understand why we do things that way. That way we do in a professional sense. And sorry if I'm not reading it as clear as you intended it there. But I think the why is really, really important. And this is one of my favorite exercises I do with my students, is what is your why? Why are you in child and youth care? What's your why? And most of them have a hard time naming that, other than, well, I want to be the adult I didn't have. That's a great motivator, but what does that actually mean or translate into how you can help that sustain you in your work, for example? How are you going to know that you are that adult to somebody else? So I love to challenge people to try to articulate what their why is, because when things are tough, when you're losing your confidence or your competence, being able to come back to your why is really important and can be self-sustaining. To be confident and approachable, yes, great. Love to hear that. Um, Holding the in the moment immediate, then the next steps, then the future actions and possibilities, managing speed of it all. Yeah, that's an interesting challenge, Zenny. And sharing all these levels with others. Yes. To be confident of your work. And at times we see things, but struggle to put it into words. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are the times when we need to try to push through the discomfort and to challenge ourselves to put it into words, especially with each other as colleagues, right? Um, Once we can articulate clearly amongst ourselves, it becomes easier to translate that sharing to other people. And I remember doing, when I did family work years ago, going into someone's home, and the mom on day one was grilling me and my colleague about what made us qualified to be able to do this work. And at the time, I was probably 27, no children, all the things. And my colleague took offense to the questions at the time. And I said, but that's actually a really thoughtful thing, like that she wanted to know what our experience was, what our credentials were. I don't take offense to that. I think that's a brilliant way that she's showing advocacy for herself and her child, et cetera, et cetera. So having that conversation helped shift the narrative, and it actually shifted how we introduced ourselves to families, right? So being open to that critical dialogue and then naming it. One way you can strengthen your voice, be more specific and grounded in real observation and clear lessons when you speak or write. Instead of general statements, I think it depends on what you saw and what you meant. Yes, it's specifics, clear, removing the emotion sometimes we're often told that we need to write in a particular way for legal things, and we absolutely do in those types of contexts. But there's other documentation that we can use that's more relational, more thoughtful, etc. Yes, that's such an important point, is the language barrier. It's good that we continue to embrace diversity. I think that's so critical, and being able to work with interpreters and using other tools and mechanisms to make sure that our understanding is clear. And I teach a lot of international students where English is sometimes their fourth or fifth language that they've learned. Um, and again, it goes back to the jargon, right? We use so much jargon in our conversations and in our words. And when they enter child and youth care practice for the first time on a practicum, they often miss the nuance, and as do the people that are supervising them, right? So having to help bridge, how do we make sure that we are communicating and that message is being received in the way it's intended, which isn't always an easy thing to do. So giving voice to practice is about making our thinking visible to ourselves, to each other in the field. You started with a moment from your own practice, you revisited it, you added language to it, and you deepened your understanding of it. The thinking is already there. It's now about strengthening how we express it. If we can name our practice, we can share it, strengthen it, and build from it. Just like the sun rises and sets in different places, our practice may look different across different contexts, but giving voice to it is something that connects us. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on your own practice. I'd like to leave you with one final thought. So as we come to a close, I'm thinking about the different places and times we're joining from. While I'm at the beginning of my day, many of you are nearing the end of yours, or at least the end of your workdays. This image of a sunset was taken on Table Mountain in South Africa when I was there for the Child and Youth Care Conference in 2019, the Durban conference. But I spent time in Cape Town, took the train to Johannesburg, spent some time there, Durban, and then the Kruger. This image stayed with me, not just because of the place, but because of the shared commitment to this work. And as I said, I am in awe of the child and youth care practitioners and the Isabidney model. I think it's the best representation of child and youth care globally. I've always appreciated the movement of the sun and the moon. They look different depending on where we are, but there's something we all share. There aren't many things that connect people globally in that way. I remember being outside our lodge at the Kruger and seeing the Southern Cross for the first time, because we don't have that constellation in the Northern Hemisphere, and was just mesmerized by it because I love stars and the sky, and just spent a lot of time lying on the ground looking up at the Southern Cross and just feeling connection to place, right, in being there. But I do think child and youth care practice and the language we share is one of the ways that we are connected as practitioners around the world. Across different contexts, cultures, and experiences, we share ways of noticing and understanding and responding. And whether you're at the beginning of your day like I am, or at the end of your day like you are, the work you're doing and how you name it matters. So thank you for your time, your reflection, and your engagement today. It's been a privilege to share this space with you, and I hope there will be many more opportunities to connect again. And I know I'll see a couple of you in St. John's, Newfoundland in June, who are coming for the Child and Youth Care World Conference. So I look forward to visiting in person with those of you who will be there. And we are going to have a period for questions and reflections, but I would rather stop sharing. So before I do that, I want to just acknowledge this last slide. One of my colleagues who's in Alberta, Rebecca Stiller, was integral in helping me think through this presentation today. But it was 6:30 for me to start. It would have been 3 a.m. for her. So I wanted to show her picture and acknowledge her today. And she also is a mom of two very small children. So getting up at 3 a.m. Was not going to happen. But I do want to acknowledge that she was a very integral part of the development of these ideas and in framing of the webinar. So I will stop sharing now, because it'd be better if people have questions or we want to have dialogue to be able to see one another. And now, how do I stop sharing?
Thank you very much. At this stage, Professor Jenny McGrath, we're gonna open them up for questions. I've noted Linda there, but please raise your hand, and then we will acknowledge you, and then you can pose your question or just make a comment. We will also then check if you want other questions. You can then do it there in the chat box for us. So we will allow, Linda, you may unmute and pose your question. Linda?
Sorry, I didn't have a question and my hand was just up. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's good. Are there any other questions or comments that people would like to make? From my side, I wasn't able to type there in the chat box, but I also just want to say thank you in advance for sharing with us. I think the presentation brought for us what you have mentioned, the complexity of our profession, and you made it in more simple terms for us to follow. My takeaway is that, and I like this word noticing, because it already says, that you must look and notice, because we used to have this complex word of observation, but
Right.
noticing says to us, look and observe and do more. And what I like that you've mentioned is our noticing must not just be looking or notice, but it needs that intention, so that we can understand what's happening here in the moment, because that will help us, to make meaning and give us that voice and articulation of then be able to express. I have experience with a lot of child and youth care workers, especially when we work with young people. They didn't even open their mouth, then we already we are more sometimes a actionist. And
Right.
so noticing with intent help us to take a step back before we then respond with our voice or intervene. Yeah, it is just my comment at this stage. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Elman. No, I think intention is what makes intervention, right? A lot of
Yes,
the times are how we interact and what we do, if it doesn't have intention behind it. And I think clear reflection in the moment and after, to determine, we lose the nuance of intervention, especially if it's creative and innovative. We need to be clear about the risks in doing that for ourselves and for young people. But I think that's where the sophistication of the work can best occur, right? When we're not afraid to be creative and innovative.
yes. Zeni, are there any other comments or questions there from the chat box that you observed?
Yes, and I see that Jabu has asked. The one thing that has been helpful in our Izibindi Izikoleni program is the community of practice meetings. I think she's talking about when child and youth care workers with the common practice come together to talk about it. And I think it relates possibly to that point about competence and confidence. But yes.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the safest places to start to practice the clear articulation of the what and the why with each other. We have a community of practice in Edmonton, where my campus is. One of my colleagues started it with another child and youth care program at a college across the street from our university. And we bring together practitioners, I think 4 times a year. And there could be up to 30 different organizations at any meeting at any given time. And a lot of it, the planning in that is to create opportunities for dialogue, and being able to work through things with people outside of your own experience, right? And it's helped a lot with that understanding and articulation. So I think communities of practice, this is a community of practice, like being able to share space and have critical conversations. The more that we do that with one another, the more, I think, to the competent, we all become more competent and more confident when we engage thoughtfully with each other at better work.
Thank you. Anybody else? There's Jabu's got a hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, can I just make a comment? I think when we were meeting yesterday, in that community of practice, what came out was the language of joining, where we were all discussing it, how, why. So I think it is a space that also builds up the language, even if you are not confident enough. But as we speak about it, you get to understand as you move and engage with the learners or other child and youth care workers, you are able to understand what is it all about, what is it that you're doing. When you come back to give feedback, you're able to say, I was doing a joining, I actually joined the children this way and that way. You get to understand better when you know the language as well. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And we get more comfortable with the language when we use the language, right? It's one thing to read about terms and to write about terms, but to speak them can be harder. So it's, I love the idea of, taking a concept like hanging in and hanging out in a community of practice and deconstructing, what does that mean? What does that even mean? Right? How are we understanding that one term? Because we're all going to experience that differently. And can we come up with an example of how we were hanging in with a young person or how we were hanging out with a young person? And how are they different? How is hanging in different than hanging out? Right? Which are terms in the BID model. Dialogue leads to exchange of good practice and secrecy
As
language.
a comment.
Yeah.
There was a talk at one stage, Jenny. I'm not too sure if there's anything in Canada or anywhere else. I think it was Reverend Barry Lodge who was talking about we must get our dictionary of childcare words out. We must look at, and I know that the complexity, you can't define it though, because they're not simple definitions. These words bind us together in our professional status. Yes. Here, there's one from them.
We need to be not afraid of the complexity and describing things in complex ways because our work is complex. But we also need to not get stuck in that complexity when we're depending on who we're engaging with, right? Because talking in jargon and complexity with a youth may not translate. And talking into simple terms with a funder or a legislator might not translate, right? They may need more of the sophistication. So there's a lot of nuance too in how and where and when we use our voice. There's another comment there. I remember the former Minister of Social Development challenging us, child and youth care workers, to articulate our work. This webinar is helpful for child and youth care, motivating CYC to make her practice voice louder. Yeah, I really hope we all get confident in, because I think part of child and youth care practice, honestly, over time has been, well, we're just doing what we do and we know what we're doing, we know it works. But I think we're at the point where we need to be a bit more boastful, and that's not our natural inclination to, raise flags and say, yay, look at child and youth care, this is who we are, this is what we do. We are more comfortable sort of in the background doing our thing, and I think that's true of most people I know who do this work. But starting to challenge ourselves, recognizing without being regulated, without people understanding what we do, we lose the potentials and the possibilities to create safer, healthier spaces for children, youth, and families. Because what we do matters, and what we do is really effective. So how do we bring that to the forefront and not lose our humility in doing that?
Yes.
Right? There's a balance,
Yes.
I think, but
Mhm.
yeah, we need to start stepping out outside of ourselves to say, because I think child and youth care is magic, but we need to articulate the magic, right?
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to say, and to comment on the 100 child and youth care workers that are sitting here today, is that we quite brilliantly work within frameworks. Obviously, those frameworks give us
Yep.
the protection, but I don't think people even respect themselves enough for how many frameworks in one moment
Yep.
with a child. I'm just thinking about, we've got our Children's Act, we've got our Constitution, which is very significant around children. We've got, children's right, the United Nations Declaration of Children's Rights, which is very significant here. Besides our childcare practice, of course, a Circle of Courage and its assessment. And South Africa around every piece of interaction with children. And the child workers here are doing it. They're working within those very frameworks. When with this one child, you bring working in the moment. I just think it's really quite amazing how we work. I'm not too sure if anybody wants to comment on that, because you're doing it. And we know we're doing it because if we do slip up, then there are raps on our knuckles, and the those that be do point fingers at us in children's homes, in schools, wherever we are, derangers of policy. So yeah, I just thought to
and I think that's an essential takeaway. Like, we are doing it, and I know you are in South Africa doing really creative, innovative, responsive work, like how you've identified a problem in community, in society, in your country, and develop projects and frameworks to address the need. No one does it better than South Africa. And I think we do, you've done some really good work about sharing, the National Association has, around sharing what Isabindi is, for example, and how that model has been picked up in other places globally. So I think in the macro sense, South Africa is doing that really well. I'm not in the micro sense day to day. So how do we bridge that and bring voice to that work within those macro frameworks, right? Because the day to day and like the push for outcomes and the need to articulate outcomes, voice is how you articulate outcomes. And being able to back up something that seems simple, like having an ice cream with a kid, is way more nuanced than having an ice cream. It's psychosomatic even. Like, the act of licking an ice cream cone is calming, right? There's intention behind the ice cream, and it creates space for conversation to happen and for me to help that youth get to a place where now I can do more intentional intervention, but I can't do that when he's in crisis. And telling him to calm down is probably not going to do it, right? So but people focused on, I took him for ice cream. And I could be reactive to, I took him for ice cream, and why are you? Or I can say, well, actually, these are the reasons why I took him for ice cream. And I find it interesting that you're focusing on this at the very start of a 3-hour intervention when all these other things happened as a result. And I think that the space for those to happen was because of the ice cream. Right?
Lovely.
So
Lovely.
it's being able to not be afraid to break it down, right? Because people didn't think about the nervous system regulation of something cold and licking,
Yes, exactly.
getting that youth back in tune with their own body. They weren't in a space that they could reflect on the incident that just happened when he was a bad kid, right? So
Yeah.
not my language, the language that was presented to me. I was rewarding bad behavior, right? So, but we need to be able to break it down. And sometimes in really, this theory applies. Well, we have this framework in child and youth care, that, so just, it gives us language to explain this, what appears simple is actually complex. So we need to name the complexity beyond the simplicity, which is one of Jack's phrases he used a lot with our students. So.
Yeah, as you speak, Jenny, I feel like what an amazing profession we're in just
Right?
listening
Yes,
to that.
it's amazing. It is amazing. It is amazing. Yeah, I feel very privileged to have been doing this for, well, since before I graduated high school. Actually, I just didn't know as much of what I was doing when I was a teenager, but I've been doing it a long time, and I don't ever see myself doing anything else. Yeah.
Great.
I'm not seeing the names any. It looks like a hand up, MT.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think as I was saying that Lizzie said too amazing, but we've got MT up and Jabu had also put up a hand, and Elvin, I'm not too sure if you want to say anything more. So take.
Yeah,
MT,
I think
you're on.
Go
ahead.
Mlungeni, you may unmute, and then we're going to give Jabu also a chance.
Good day, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'd love to take this opportunity to thank the ECB in the programming school. And my experience at NACCW opened my eyes to how to identify children at risk. I learned to recognize some signs of trauma, neglect, and GBV through behavior, emotional response, and changes in social interactions. This experience strengthened my ability to respond with empathy and to create safe, supportive space for vulnerable children. So I thank you, and this lovely webinar for this knowledge.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you very much. So I also just wanted to talk about the point on speaking up. One time I was doing like research around, how child and youth care workers were using social media to actually promote the work. And when I was actually checking that on TikTok, I only found one student, DUT student, who was actually talking about childcare work. When I was checking other professions, your social workers, your psychologists, they were out there promoting their work in different spaces, even also on Facebook, and as well on other platforms. They are there already speaking about that. But I also wanted to make another point around, articulation, that also feedbacks helps. When you receive a feedback, sometimes feedback, it's not that easy, but it actually helps you to be able to articulate yourself. I remember when I started as a child and youth care worker in the NACCW. I wrote a report with my supervisor. When we wrote the report about the case studies, we actually wrote what was the problem and the end of it. So there was no process of what the child and youth care worker did. And we submitted the report. And I remember Melk saying, it feels like you are doing magic. You come from a problem, then pooh, you have resolved it. What about the process? What did the child and youth care worker do? So we got to understand and articulate it better in the writing. So I think feedback does help very well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example. And I know, notice, I don't know if you noted, challenge noted Jabu in the chat. I think social media, as much as it can be problematic, it also has lots of benefits and strengths. And I think it's a great idea, especially practitioner voice, because there's lots of writing and research that's starting to happen about child and youth care, but it's often behind a paywall or behind or in an academic journal that people don't have access to. It's not helpful to the people who are doing the day-to-day work. So that's why CYCnet is so important and why we need to keep supporting CYCnet and CYC Online and the Relational Journal. And I do think social media is another outlet. And I'm not on TikTok, but I love the idea of the reels and the small, just sound bites of, like, even the point that I just said about hanging in and hanging out. Imagine having a small, very brief webinar on what's the difference in hanging in and hanging out, and having a loop of reels that go through the bid model, like getting Tom Garfat to talk about the characteristics of the bid model in reels in conversation with new practitioners or something. How do you make sense of Tom came up with these ideas with Leon and with John and with James, but how are practitioners making sense of a concept that's as nuanced as love, right? How is that? Yeah, we can write about it being important, but how is it showing up in practice, and how are we articulating love in practice? That'd be a really fun soundbite. So do it.
Yeah. Do the practice and spit it out. It's looking different, but it's the same. Yeah.
Because we do need research and we do need academic publications, because that gives credibility to funders and to, the powers that be sometimes that can, that legislate, that do those things. They need empirical grounded research to say the why. And we haven't had enough of that in our work. To the comment about from the director of social development, you need to do that. Well, that's important for that piece. TikToks are not going to cut it if that's our only form of right. But yes. I think both are important because we need more access and space for people who are doing the work day in and day out to be able to access knowledge and information. So I will plug CYCnet again, that there's it's open resource, and the access to information on CYCnet is quite profound, and obviously has strong links to South Africa.
I see that we don't have any more questions or comments, and we have come to the end of our webinar. And I would ask our Deputy Director, Dr. Zeni Tambadou, just to do then the official vote of thanks for us, as well as some announcements for the child and youth care workers. Zeni, over to you.
Thank you very much. Jabu, maybe you just want to start?
Yes, Zeni. So
put your camera on if you can.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. Think you get to see the face that was behind the comments. So firstly, we would like to thank on behalf of National Association, we would like to thank everyone that came through and joined our webinar today. We really appreciated that you took your time to actually listen to such a powerful and developing session. So we really appreciate your presence. So I would be doing the vote of thanks. We also like to give a sincere appreciation to our guest speaker who took us through step by step, who actually, involved us in her presentation. We could participate, enjoy, and also be able to engage. So we really appreciate your presence, making time for us. Please make sure that you come next time and be part of us. We are actually happy to listen to you over and over, and actually, because this is actually contributing and developing and also bridging the gap, in terms of the academical levels that we have in our country. So we really appreciate the add-on that you're bringing into our own development. We would also like to thank our Deputy Director, Dr. Tambadou, for also making time, and also organizing such a beautiful webinar for us to learn day by day. We really appreciate Mr. Gallant, our program director. It's always nice to hear your voice and nice to see you. We really appreciate your presence. Randy, we also appreciate you joining us today, your preparations and sending through the links. We really appreciate your time. And we also like to appreciate everyone, all our participants, people that participated in the chats, people that made comments. We really appreciate. Please do join our next webinars. So I'll hand over to Zeni. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes. Thank you, Jabu. Thank you very much. It's lovely to see young child and youth care workers amongst us here, so vibrant, and the future looks very good for child and youth care in South Africa. I just want to say, just as to conclude, I always love parables. The parables in the Bible always have such deeper meaning for me, and I'm reminded now of the 2 loaves and 5. When Jesus was speaking with the multitudes, and there were so many people, and it was getting dark, and they didn't want to leave, and the little boy arrived with and they said, how are we going to feed them, said the disciples, and the little boy arrived with his tools to feed them, and Jesus blessed it, and Jesus fed the multitude. And when the disciples collected the bones of the fish afterwards, they had sackfuls after sackfuls that they took away with them. And Jenny, I think you've done that for us. You've fish, and you've shared so generously and thoughtfully, and I'm aware that you put a lot of preparation into thinking this through and coming here with a presentation that have touched us. I think that you have fed the multitudes in South Africa, and I think that will ensure practice improves, that the children we service are touched and are blessed by. Love these presentations we have on practice, because we try in South Africa to refine the way we work. I think you've left us with something very special today, and just on behalf of all of us here, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And I just want to end by saying thank you for the invitation. It's quite a privilege to be able to share space with you. I hope that there is another conference in South Africa at some point that I can come and see you in person, see your faces, because I miss the hugs and the connections in that way too. And not being able to see everybody today, it was lovely to see those who were able to turn your cameras on, but know that I felt your presence. So thank you again very much for the opportunity and the invitation, Zenny.
Thank you. Thank you. And for the field, I want to say, please remember Child and Youth Week is coming up in the first week of May, and we hope that all of you are planning and preparing for your own personal celebrations of the wonderful work that you do. The theme for the conference, connecting, advocating troubled times. We are having an official launch on the 4th, which is a Monday, which is the opening of International Child and Youth Week. We have a range of international government, council speakers, but we have a very, very exciting keynote speaker that Randy is going to start promoting from after this webinar. So we really look forward to all of you putting time aside for that. And just to say that for CISPAT, there will be a memorial held on Thursday, the 7th, which you're all welcome to. Notification of that too will go out. And we've decided to do that memorial during Child and Youth Care Worker Week, because she was a leader and a woman of substance amongst us, and we would like to acknowledge her. So thank you very much. We look forward to meeting again with everybody. And I think that over to you to close, Elwyn.
Once again, thank you to all our child and youth care workers, our NACCW staff, all social service professionals who have made the time and attended our wonderful webinar with our esteemed guest, Jenny McGrath. Jenny, thank you very much for getting up so early in the morning and for your commitment to our field. We appreciate and we share all these wonderful things. And thank you for reminding the NACCW that they need to have this conference that we can be face to face with each other and share the love and childcare practice experiences. Once again, thank you all of you that participated, and we'll discuss and talk to each other very soon in May during the International Child and Youth Care Workers Week. Thank you. And at that note, it's now 1 minute past 1. We close then this webinar, and all the best. Let's give our guest speaker once again a round of applause.